Ah, he said, it's this script. So, um, we were fortunate in that the script he was talking about was not our script, but yeah, he made it really clear that the script stank, and he said, "Look, you may think I'm being harsh, but I'm paying $15,000 a pop for these scripts." He says, "Not just that. Uh, People are going to be seated in front of their television. They're taking time out from their day to watch this show as compared to some other show. The competitor is only a channel away. We owe it to them to entertain them, to keep them engaged, and we owe it to the studio who's paying all of our salaries to do a good job of this." Well, that stuck in my mind, and you know, it made me think that that's not too far different from the responsibility we have as instructional designers. Oh, and speaking of instructional design, what happened is that after about 7, 8 years of working in Hollywood, I began to just sort of get tired of the grind of it and wanted to do something else that would allow me to apply these skills. And then when I saw an ad for uh, a interactive web designer from a company called Quizzic, based in California, I applied and got into it. And so that's how I learned something about instructional design, adult learning. I also took some courses at UCLA Extension on adult learning. So that's my basic background. And that explains why I'm really big on trying to engage people, to really not just present the information, but to do it in a way that really keeps them interested and actively involved. Uh, Now, if you've gone to any of these seminars, you've heard the word engage thrown around from time to time. Let me just ask you, let me throw the question out there. What does engage mean to you? I mean, what is this word engage? What do we mean by that? By the way, Bobby, how would I type onto that gray area below if I wanted to just get some of the responses?
Well, we could just click
Well,
on the text button,
actually,
which is the T in the top left there, and that will give you a text box that you can just type onto the gray area.
okay, all right. So we've got a text box here, and one of the words I'm seeing is hook.
We have some yeah, and we have some responses coming into the chat here.
I'm seeing them, and I'm typing some up. Grab attention.
Robin says, "Get and stay interested." Grab attention.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody is saying the learner is involved, an active participant.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Somebody's saying get them talking, absorbed, enraptured. I like that word.
I like that word, enraptured. Enraptured, yes, indeed. Well, all right. Well, let me move to the slide I have, my definition of engage. And by the way, what you have here, that feedback, that's right on. Um, hey, there's a hook right there. Well, what do you know? Engage, to attract interest or attention and to hold it. Um, you want to you want to grab them. You want to get them thinking, this is worth paying attention to. Now, I could do a whole seminar just on this one word itself, this whole concept. But what I'll do to just give you a little spice, a little direction that you might want to head toward uh, for further explanation, there's a book I found that neatly summarizes it. It's called Made to Stick by Chip Heath and Dan Heath. No need to write this down right now because I have it at the end on one of the screens. But here's a capsule summary of what they say it takes to engage people. Principle number one is simplicity. Whatever method you use has to be simple. If it's very complicated, you have a chance of losing people. It should be unexpected. There should be an element of surprise. People say, "Oh, this is different from what I thought it would be," or it arouses their curiosity. They're saying, "Well, why did you put it that way?" or "What did you mean by that?" It's unexpected. Number three, it's concrete. The more abstract something is, the more it becomes just a mental construct. It's difficult for people to connect with their life. It's difficult for them to really feel it. But if you start making things concrete, if you start talking about an ice-filled bathtub, apples with razors, just that visual image itself sticks in someone's mind. Number four is credibility. You want to think that there's reason to believe it. Are you presenting data from a credible source? Is the source itself credible? Does it mirror real life experiences? That reduces people's, or let me put it the other way. It increases their willingness to suspend any possible disbelief. Principle number five, does it engage the emotions? Does it make you laugh? Does it make you curious? Does it worry you? Uh, think of think of an emotion and think of a way you can engage it. And finally, there's stories, and that's where I'm coming in here. Um, Stories act to not just give you information, but to reflect experience. They're sort of like encapsulated experience that you're passing on to someone. So why do we tell stories? Well, really from time immemorial, since, or I should say, the beginning of recorded time, the beginning of language, human beings have used stories to not just to pass on information, but to illuminate, to illustrate, to pass on life lessons. Uh, you think of the beginning of languages, it's probably like the hunters and gatherers finding ways in real time to say, hey, look out for that bear. Be careful, be quiet, over there, that sort of thing. Then, after the successful hunt, the survivors could come back and then use the past tense to say, oh, okay, here's what happened. Here's how I managed to bring back the deer. Here's how I managed to avoid the lion. This information could be very useful to you. It really served a survival function. Similarly, with females, it's like these are the safe things to gather. These are the places to keep away from. Don't go in that water. Recounting all of these experiences. And then all of this is past tense. People then project it into future tense. Oh, this information could be useful in the future. But for any of that to be useful, it had to really connect with something real, something that had to do with survival, something that people felt would actually be useful in their lives. Now, there's a problem with stories, though, because as history developed and stories became more and more sophisticated, stories became religion. They became belief. They became doctrine. Uh, but as history developed to the age of reason, you had scientific types, people who said, well, this story doesn't really map to what I observe happening. You say that the earth is flat. I can see that that's not really true based on observation. You say that this will happen. I see something else happening. So there came a tension, and we had the age of reasoning where it's like, okay, I'm going to make an argument, and now I need proof of that. And that became the predominant method, and that's what instructional design came out of. So instead of saying, I'm going to tell you a story about how I managed to survive a bear attack, the instructional designer would say, all right, upon listening to this story, you will understand the various types of bears that are prone to attack you, when they're most likely to attack you, what spears are best for dealing with angry bears, and what to do if your spear should break. Um, it gets removed from the emotions of the situation. It may all be true, it may be factual, it may give you good information, but it's not as emotionally involving, and as a result, you often walk away saying, "Oh, well, that was interesting, but well, what are we going to do?" So, what are some of the things we can do to actually apply storytelling techniques? Uh, By the way, if I'm occasionally just sort of seeming a little distracted, it's because I'm fascinated by the side chatter that's going on in the chat room. So please, Bobby, if you see something particularly great, feel free to just interrupt. So, what's one of the key things to telling a story? That would be plot. What is a plot? It's the scaffolding of a story, so to speak, the structure, the sequence of events. But it's not just any sequence. You can sequence events that are unrelated, and things just become episodic, which means this happened, that happened, the other thing happened. They're unrelated, and that's not a satisfying story. A good plot is that everything that happens is linked by what happened before. There's causal effect. And not just any causal effect. If it's a really great plot, it flows from a premise. A premise is, what are you trying to prove? Um, what uh, what are you trying to prove by the events that happen in the story? Now, it doesn't have to be true objectively speaking in a story. In instructional design, it should be true. You are trying to prove something, some point, to offer convincing evidence at some point. But if you're telling a story, it doesn't have to be absolutely true. Um, and the final thing, the final bullet we see here is that a good story is about transformation from one state of mind to another. So when you hear writers and directors and actors talking about story arc, that's what they mean. Starting from one state of being and ending up uh, different. You are no longer the same person, the main actor. So the opposite would be not just love to hate, but love to apathy, from being a coward to being a hero, from being a disbeliever to being a preacher. Exorcist would pop into mind, for example. Um, so let's look at some movies that most people are familiar with. Now, these premises I have here are not printed on the outside of the box. They're just examples, and I think they fit pretty well. What's the premise of Casablanca? The needs of many outweigh the needs of just two. And so everything that happens in that movie supports that premise. The Godfather, family is destiny. You see it not just in the first one, but in all three. Um, think of Michael saying, "I keep trying to get back out, but they keep dragging me back in." Family is destiny. He can't get out. Matrix, humanity is a slave to its illusions. So, how would you apply that to e-learning? Think about, what is the premise? What are you trying to prove? What are you trying to demonstrate? Um, and so, any story or story element you have should support that premise. And anything that doesn't support that is superfluous. It's basically unnecessary. It may be useful for another story, but not the story you're trying to tell. Okay. Another thing you want to do when you're thinking about storytelling is making clear what's at stake. Because the more that's at stake, the more compelling the story. Um, if the worst that could happen to someone in a situation is that their feelings could get hurt, Oh, okay. Well, that's sort of interesting. If the worst that could happen to them is that they would be humiliated and their spouse would be humiliated, and this humiliation would pass on to their family for generations. Well, now people are leaning forward. That's a lot at stake. Now I care a lot because a lot is at stake. So I talked about respect versus humiliation, success versus failure, financial gain versus loss. Again, let's bring this back home. How could that get applied to an e-learning situation? Um, well, I recall being in a meeting with a client who wanted to have an online course for fire safety. And they were very frustrated because their previous course was not as effective as they had hoped. And I said, well, why do you say that? They said, well, we had a foreman who had been on the job 10 years, and God knows how many fire safety courses we take because, we do these twice a year, so possibly he's taken 20. He goes into one of our rooms where we have all of our test equipment, and it's all electronic equipment, very expensive equipment. And he sees one of he sees a piece of equipment smoking. There's smoke coming out of the back of it. He goes around to investigate, and there are sparks. Now, it's in the morning. He happens to have a cup of coffee in his hand, and just by reflex, he throws the coffee on to where he sees the flames. Big mistake. This not only damages the equipment, which is damaged anyway because of the flames, but I mean, big short, electrical sparks flying everywhere, smoke, 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 over $250,000 worth of damage. And I go, bingo. And they said, well, what are you talking about? I said, well, this is our story. This is how we're going to lead in. He says, well, I don't know. You know how clients are. Well, we don't want to like embarrass anybody or this and that. He didn't do it on purpose. I said, look, what's a better way to get people to understand the importance of what you're saying if you said that, look, even an employee, we're going to tell you about a story about someone who was on the job for 10 years, probably had all the information at hand, and yet, in a moment's impulse, destroyed $250,000 worth of equipment. Do you think that'll capture people's attention? They said, there you go. You don't want to be that person, so you're going to pay closer attention. You don't want to be the one responsible for that sort of damage, so you're going to pay attention. So you've made it clear what's at stake, and you're appealing to the emotions. That's what hooks. That's what engages. That's what excites. Now, I put a few emotions here up on the board, curiosity, worry, sympathy, amusement, but those are by no means the only ones. When you're sitting and looking for ideas, put down a list. See how many you can think of. And when you're doing that, think to yourself, what is my response? When I am listening or thinking about the situation, what does it make me feel? What could I make someone else feel? What would be most powerful? What would hook them the most? Okay? So once you've thought about emotions and what's at stake, another thing you can do is to use tension. Tension, an unresolved problem. What sets the story in motion? Because when we say emotions, there is motion in that word. Or rather, there's motion in the word emotion. It starts things moving. If things are at rest, you need to get them moving. And how do you do that? You see it time and time again in stories. People are basically in a state. Something happens. Let's say the Maltese Falcon. The detective is sitting in his office. the beautiful young woman comes in and offers a problem. They don't necessarily believe it, but they're going to follow up on it for the money. The detective's partner ends up dead. Now, the status quo has been permanently altered. Can't let that go. Who killed his partner and what's going on? So that's just one example of setting up tension, a problem that is unresolved and has to be resolved. And I emphasize that. If it's unimportant, then people say, why go through the trouble? It has to be resolved. If you really have great tension, the hero may not want to resolve it, but has no choice, is compelled to action. All right, well, let me take a pause. Anybody got any questions so far? Or examples of maybe, or questions of how you could apply something like this?
Gordon, I have one for you. How about using fear as an emotion?
Well, fear
did you hear that? How about using fear? Is that something that we should do in e-learning, or is that something that we should avoid in e-learning?
Well, I think everything is open for discussion. Fear is a very powerful emotion, but I would say that I would want to present it in a constructive way, in a sense that you don't want that to be the emotion they are left with after finishing the course, because that's terrible. You feel like, oh man, I've taken this course and now I feel horrible. I don't know what to do. If, on the other hand, you had a course where you were saying, all right, this course is about how to detect breast cancer, you would want them to have a certain amount of fear to understand that this is real. It's something you should pay attention to. It's something you should monitor on a frequent basis. But that if you do everything you are supposed to do, and you do it when you're supposed to do it, your chances of detecting and avoiding any serious problems are great. So in that case, I think it could be positive.
Great. Does anybody else have any examples that they can share with us, or any questions for Gordon on how to incorporate these 5 points? We've got some stuff coming here in the chat. They say it depends on how, Jose says it depends on how fear is being used. Better yet, it's about an opportunity that shouldn't be missed. I like that. That's good, Jerry. Fear can also make them tune out or depart early. That's true, too.
Yeah, so you have to be very conscious about that and think it through. It's certainly never a thing of just picking something and saying, oh, fear will work, and boom, slap it in. You have to think of, does it really serve your objective, and does it support your premise? Remember, I mentioned premise, so going back to that breast cancer example, if the premise is that early detection will prevent breast cancer, then you can use fear to say, fear of having to have extensive surgery would motivate you to do the frequent exams and to do them correctly. But you don't want to just leave people with the fear that no matter what they do, the outcome could be bad. Oh, I like this. In compliance training, if the learner becomes the hero, fear will be resolved. Quick thing, I worked on a course on insider training. It was a compliance course for broker-dealers. And the device we used there was to have a broker-dealer who really believed that he could get away with insider trading. And so the thread of the story was, of course, the premise is you can't get away with insider trading. But we had the story of a broker-dealer who was going through everything that you would do, thinking that you could get away with it. And through every step, every beat of the story, as he's doing this, we show what the SEC and other regulatory agencies are doing to find out about it, to sort of like trigger their various sensors so they know what's going on. And in the end, he ends up getting arrested and having his license suspended. So there's the premise. There's, in this case, we weren't really dealing. We were dealing with fear, but not in a very upfront way. So should I move on, or should we have a little bit more discussion? All right. So what types of tension can we have here? Not all types of tension are the same. Common genres you see in terms of tension are mystery, suspense, comedy. There's tension in comedy. Is that pie going to hit you in the face? Are you going to slip on that banana peel? What's going to happen when you do? Is somebody going to say something inappropriate? Sitcoms are all about that sort of tension. Someone feeling like, they tend to be contrived, but that's still what it's all about. You can't say a certain thing, so are you going to say it? You're not supposed to know something, but you do know it. Disaster genre, survival. Are you going to survive the job interview? Are you going to get the job? Ticking clock is, of course, a very common one. You have a certain amount of time to do something, a certain amount of time to collect information you need. By the way, let me throw a quick question out there. Anybody know the difference between mystery and suspense? What's the difference?
I don't see a lot of response coming in the chat room here. What's the difference between mystery and suspense, folks?
Folks are scratching their heads. Well, mystery can be an unsolved
Here we have
case.
some things. There's a time element in suspense. Somebody's saying suspense. You may already have an idea of the outcome.
All right, mystery, there's a problem to solve. Alfred Hitchcock put it well. Here's an example. With mystery, a man gets on a train carrying an attaché case. Someone's following and watching him very closely. We don't know what's in the case, therefore, there's a mystery. With suspense, before the man gets on the train with the attaché case, we see that he's put a bomb in it. So there's no mystery what's in the case. The suspense is, when is that bomb going to explode? So mystery and suspense can be great for e-learning because you can present a problem for someone. Here's a mystery. We're going to give you clues so that by the end of the course, you will be able to solve the mystery. Suspense can be, something's going to happen, and we're going to tell you what's going to happen. But the suspense is going to be how soon it happens and in what shape. So perhaps what's required of you as a learner is to prevent it from happening by collecting the proper clues and information and solving. Okay? So those are ways you can do that. Related to tension is conflict. And let me tell you, you don't have any kind of story without conflict. Opposition. Things can't go easy. In the greatest stories, things are hard and they're going to get harder. And they better get harder because otherwise you lose interest. And one of the more interesting things I learned was that there are three types of conflicts or levels of conflict. You have the internal conflict. That's the conflict going on within you. Should I do this? Should I do that? Is this the right thing to do? Or what is the right thing to do? I want to do this, but I'm afraid to do it. This is the internal conflict. Interpersonal conflict is conflict between you and another person, okay? Or you and a group of people, but small. Societal conflict is conflict between societies, um, groups, wars, masses. In epics, you have the hero who is conflicted with himself. He's having conflict with others within his social group, and also conflicts with others outside the social group. You think of Homer's Odyssey and all that sort of thing. Epics are made with three layers of conflict, and they're all playing out at once. Think of Tolstoy, and you've got that sort of thing. All right, now when you're doing e-learning, right, maybe you don't need three levels of conflict, but think about them, whether it's internal, interpersonal, societal, which one is most useful for what you're trying to do. Then once you've worked this out, you thought, okay, I know what's at stake. I got a few emotions I can play with, maybe one or two. I'm thinking about tension. I'm thinking about conflict. Then what am I going to do? Well, another big thing in storytelling is that you show. You don't just tell. You don't ask your audience to take your word for it. You offer visual proof. So what that means is you don't say, if you do this, then that will happen. That's telling. Showing is having someone do it, and then it happens. You see it happen. Going back again to our example of doing the self-examinations. You could just say, if you don't do this, then that will happen. But you could show someone who is being very cavalier about it or not doing it the right way. And then you then fade to several months later when a lump is detected, and now we go down that path of, oh no, why didn't I do it the right way to begin with? Okay, so think of ways to show it, demonstrate it, provide practical, real examples, things that really happen, because then people are saying, oh, okay, I here it is right here in front of me. I don't just have to take their word for it. Now, once you've got a story or a story element, keep it moving forward. Um, Again, because you're trying to prove a premise, you want to move from one step to the next to build your case. So you start out with something small, then you add to it, so you are giving mounting evidence. Now, if you've got a 15, 20-minute course, all right, maybe you only need 3 or 4 things to keep the story moving forward. But you want to build that case, build towards your premise, offer more evidence. Okay? One thing that people often overlook is that you can use the way you write to build momentum to speed and slow. You know that if you're looking at long blocks of text, it's sort of intimidating. I mean, one thing about web writing 101 is that you want to break up your text, but really it makes sense that shorter sentences speed things up. Longer sentences slow things down. So maybe you can use some of your longer sentences at the beginning when you're building things. But as you move toward your conclusion, you might use shorter sentences, more clipped language. And these, by the way, are also easier for people to recall. So think about that. How am I doing, folks? Anybody want to contribute anything? Any questions at this point? just taking the temperature.
Susan has a point here.
All
Yeah,
right.
Susan has a point in the chat area. She's saying a very different language is needed for speaking versus writing to sustain attention. Do you want to address that?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And again, this is something that deserves a seminar in and of itself. When you're writing for the written word, meaning just something that somebody's going to read, you, well, let's put it this way, that's very different from what you'd write for dialogue. If you're writing a script where somebody's actually going to be saying something, you really do need to have shorter sentences. You really need to be very careful about long words, about passive voice as opposed to active. The big part. So I would
whoever was just saying something, just press the talk button and or raise your hand, and Gordon will get to you.
Okay, so with dialogue, one of the best things you can do is really just try to say it yourself. If you find that you are having trouble saying it smoothly and easily and effortlessly, then so will the person who's going to have to actually read it. If it sounds stilted, rework it until at least it sounds smooth. You don't have to mimic actual speech exactly, but it should sound natural and comfortable to the ear. That's a key thing. And particularly with dialogue, I think it's important to use some of the things we've talked about: tension, conflict. I would exaggerate it slightly, but not take it over the top. But that's what will make dialogue a lot more interesting. Instead of having two people discussing something and saying, well, I think this. Well, I agree with you, but have you thought about that? Oh, that's a very good point. People are going to go to sleep. It's much more interesting if one person is saying, I believe this, and the other person saying, I don't, I disagree with you. Already we've got some conflict. That makes the conversation more interesting. You still get the information out, but you do it in a way that people are much more engaged because they feel like, well, there's some conflict here, and this other person's actually on the verge of being a little bit insulting. Wow, that's interesting. I'll pay closer attention to this. Someone made the point about avoiding jargon. Again, very important. You'll have clients who are so used to their jargon that they forget that maybe not all of their audience gets it. On the other hand, if there are certain terms that everybody gets, put them in there because people will feel that that's closer to real conversation than maybe saying the whole term, which nobody would use in that context. Okay? So, since I'm on this thing about keep the story moving forward, I think I'll keep my story moving forward. How are you going to move it forward? By increasing the pressure, things going from bad to worse. Failure. Hey, that's a real motivator. Putting the learner in a situation where they have to try something and it doesn't work, or they see a character who really is a stand-in for the learner trying something and it doesn't work, it fails miserably. Then they try again and again. Learning something every time, keep in mind. That's the important thing. You learn from these failures. So give people opportunities to fail. Remember, one of the nice things about the e-learning environment is that you can fail without everybody necessarily knowing it and looking at you and pointing at you and laughing. So it's a safe environment for them to explore what they don't know, to take risks. So show those risks. Don't be afraid to up the pressure, but also provide some safety valves, which are the learning. It's like, okay, that didn't work, but what did you learn from this? how can you apply this to the next situation that's going to come up? So you've got this tension and release. It's like, oh, okay, this is hard, this is hard, this is hard. Oh, I learned something. I applied this. This worked. This made this a little bit easier. It didn't go as badly as I thought it would. So you feel stronger and more prepared for the next thing. So you don't ever give people too much so that they feel overwhelmed, but so that they definitely do feel challenged. Okay? And in a really great story, a movie, what you see is it's building up to a climax where you're really beginning to wonder, can the hero overcome? And often is what you often see is like, oh no, the villain appears to have won. What are we going to do now? This is, wow. So I don't know what to do. What's the hero going to do? Because I don't know what I'd do in the situation. Now you're really hooked. There's the maximum tension. Things may really not work out well. What are you going to do? This is what we call the turning point. This is where the hero really has to make a break with the past, has to take a leap of faith, has to try something new, the life-changing moment. And by the way, this is the point that proves the premise. So if the premise was that, going back to the fire safety example, that when you are in a situation when you see a fire, stop and think first. It's always better to take a few seconds to think and reflect, and maybe you give them like an easy acronym to remember. Maybe there are 5 letters in it and it spells a word. Remember that and do that. That gives people that, and they're thinking, okay, I can't react the way I did before. I'm going to do this. Now what's my choice? How do I solve the problem? The turning point has to prove the premise. So the ending is with the tension resolved. The tension that you set up in the beginning has now been resolved. There may be other problems ahead, but they're different problems. And you will deal with them differently. Or maybe you will have a better set of tools, more skills with which to deal with them. But you have definitely gained something. You have new knowledge, new insights, new skills, something that you can bring to bear. This is, instructionally speaking, you bring it around to remember those learning objectives we talked about at the beginning? Well, here's where you see that we've met those objectives. You now have this ability. You now are able to do this, whereas before you were not. You are now capable, whereas at first you were less capable. Okay. Now, someone said always happy endings. Of course, happy is a relative thing. You may have a skill, but that does not necessarily mean everybody lives happily ever after. Again, going to the self-examination example, that doesn't mean that no one will ever develop cancer or that the outcome will always be positive. But certainly you will get better results than if there were no examinations going on. So it has to reflect the real world. If it's all happy, 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 people say that's not the real world. On the other hand, if it's slightly down, you want to say, well, it's not always going to work out well, but it's going to work out as best it possibly can if you use these techniques, if you do it under these circumstances. So just to summarize and to open it up for any questions that might come in, I think you really want to start with a premise, something your audience cares about, something that's important to them. You want to present compelling mounting evidence to support that premise. You want to use conflict, tension, whatever emotions you find are useful and engaging to support that premise and to keep it moving and to connect it to what people know or want to know or need to know. You want to demonstrate it. You want to have them seeing it. You want to have them see it happen before their eyes. So it's really there. They don't just have to take your word for it. And then you would summarize by having not just proving the premise, but saying, I proved it, and here was the evidence, and you saw it, and you can now apply these skills to similar situations, and they will work just as effectively for you. So that's it in a nutshell. If you want to check some of these things out, um, a book I would recommend is The Art and Craft of Storytelling by Nancy Lamb. This is available on Amazon for like $10. Uh, Easy read, has a lot of good information in it. I could recommend half a dozen books, but I'd say, this gives you some great bang for the buck. Made to Stick, I mentioned that at the beginning. That's really great for just how to engage audiences in all sorts of ways, not just in e-learning, but you can apply it to presentations, um, anything that has to do with engaging people. And if you'd like to see what I think is a really great example of applying some of these techniques, check out You Suck at Photoshop. Just go onto Google, enter that term, You Suck at Photoshop. Maybe you enter Donnie Hoyle's name, and it'll show up. These are a series of Photoshop tutorials, and the basic conceit is that he has a lot of personal issues going on in the background, and that's what really makes these tutorials a lot more interesting than if it was just showing you how to use Photoshop. So, any questions, anybody?
I'd like to open up the floor if anybody has any questions for Gordon.
Gordon?
Yep.
I have a question. Stories are truly driven by conflict, but I think in the instructional arena, which I admit I don't have a lot of experience in, people are ultimately looking for a benefit to be better than they are now, and yes, that could represent an obstacle, but I still think, I just have an opinion that there's an opportunity for them to seize, less than a conflict to, I don't know, managed or avoided or attacked. Just a thought.
Well, I agree that when you're talking about a benefit, there's maybe perhaps less of a conflict, but there is a tension. You want this benefit, but how are you going to get it? So the conflict can be what obstacles are in your way? What's preventing you from getting this benefit? Is it your lack of sales skill? Is it your lack of knowledge? Is it what is it? What do we identify? So that is the tension and the conflict, if you will. You want this benefit, but there's something standing in your way. And what we're going to do in this course is to help you realize this benefit, to give you the skills you need to overcome the obstacles standing in your way. So that's the simple way I would look at it.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Oh, somebody mentioned Robert McKee.
Do we have any?
Let me just quickly, Robert McKee, I had that there. One of the first things I did once I started getting into the Hollywood writing arena was to attend Robert McKee's script writing course. Now, I don't know whether he does these anywhere other than in Southern California, but it's almost like a rite of passage for script writers. And you could do a lot worse than getting a book by Robert McKee. It, again, expands well beyond the e-learning, subject arena, but you'll find it very useful. So yeah, just Google
I'd just like to wrap
his
up
name.
here. Yeah, we've gone over a little bit, and I think when Gordon and I talked about this, Gordon has another really good point. Sometimes we think in e-learning that we have to do all of this all the time, and Gordon, maybe you'd like to expand on that just for a minute here, and then we'll call it a wrap.
Right. What I want to emphasize is that I don't necessarily build a full-fledged story into every course I do. I just look for ways to use storytelling techniques or elements to heighten the engagement factor. So, for example, I'm working on a course for Scion right now. It's just a little 10-minute course on what's new 2010, just changes to the model year. Short list of changes. But to make it a little bit more interesting than just a recitation of facts, the conceit, if you will, is that you've been invited to Scion World, where there's an art museum, there's a racetrack, there's an arcade. So if you go to the art museum, you see the color and stylistic changes happening to Scion. If you go to the racetrack, you get your competitive analysis. If you go to the arcade, there are some flash exercises you can do. So, you know, it's it's episodic in the sense that there's really no real premise we're trying to prove. There's very little conflict, but just with some storytelling elements of you're in this world and you're going from venue to venue and brushing up on things. That adds a little bit more interest, or hopefully a lot more interest than if it was just here are the changes for 2010. Memorize them. Now here's a test to see how well you memorized it. Thank you very much.
All right, folks. Thank all of you for coming. We've gone over a little bit today. I'm glad you could be here. We're all going to hang around a little bit. Join us in May, on May the 19th, I believe. We are going to talk with D. Mike Smith about the generations and educating people like my kids, the millennials, and the difference between those people and the boomers. So, Gordon, I'd like to thank you so much. This was absolutely awesome, and thank everybody for coming, and we'll see you in May. Anybody who wants to hang around for a while will be here. Oh, and this is archived. It will be up on the website. So you can listen to it anytime by going to the LaSalle/ITM lunchtime learning sessions and check out the archives.
All righty. So that was fun.
Good. That was great. That was fun. I had a good time too. I'm a little concerned about the fact that the wrong URL went out, but we still had 34 people, so that was pretty good.
Yep. Well, one thing, just the idea just popped into my head is to send a follow-up email just saying, just in case you couldn't get in because of the wrong URL or whatever that was, it is archived, so you can, check it out.
Yeah, great idea, Gordon. I'll have those the people in adult enrollment do that today, and I'm going to sign off here, and
all right.
I will be giving you a buzz this afternoon, and we'll get in touch. Okay? Thanks so much.
All righty then.
Fantastic presentation, and I really, really enjoyed it.
Well, thank you, and we'll talk later. Bye.